Have you ever noticed something strange about regret? It never announces itself. It never knocks on the door and says, "I'm here. It's time to face me." It simply appears one ordinary day, while washing dishes, while driving home, while sitting through a meeting that has nothing to do with the things that truly matter. Then suddenly it lands with incredible force, almost as if the person remembered something they had spent months, maybe years, trying not to remember. After listening to countless people share the quiet stories hidden inside their hearts, one truth keeps appearing again and again. The people who carry the deepest regret are rarely the ones who left in anger. Anger is loud. Anger creates movement. Anger gives people something to blame. But the deepest regret belongs to the ones who slowly watched someone stop reaching for them. They noticed little changes. The messages became shorter. The warmth faded. The excitement disappeared. The laughter arrived less often. At first they convinced themselves everything was fine. Then they ignored the growing silence because accepting it felt too painful. But by the time they finally understood what was happening, not just in their thoughts but deep inside where real truth settles, the person they loved had already released the relationship. Stay with me because this next part explains everything. If this speaks to your heart, keep listening. What comes next may completely change how you understand your own story. That is exactly what unfolded here. It may even be happening right now while you are listening. You stepped back, not because you stopped loving them, not because your feelings disappeared overnight. You stepped back because something inside you simply became exhausted. There is a special kind of energy required to keep holding on to someone who is not reaching back with the same care, the same effort, or the same intention. Eventually, that energy runs out, quietly, without drama, without shouting. One day, you simply realized that carrying the relationship alone was becoming heavier than letting it go. That decision looked almost invisible from the outside. Most people never noticed it. But inside you, it changed everything. It set something into motion that neither of you fully understood in that moment. That is what I want to explore with you today, because this quiet decision started a chain of events that continues even now. I believe that with complete certainty. There is something unfolding on the other side of your silence, and understanding it may protect your heart when the next chapter begins. Keep watching because the most important part has not arrived yet. What they are experiencing now may surprise you more than anything you have imagined. Before we go any deeper, I want to give you something practical. You deserve more than comforting words. You deserve more than emotional speeches that sound beautiful for a few minutes and then disappear. You deserve to understand what is actually happening beneath the surface so that when this person eventually finds their way back into your life, you can recognize it without confusion. When someone loses access to a person their heart quietly depended on, something unusual begins to happen inside them. This is not about casual attraction or temporary excitement. This is about a connection that slowly became part of their emotional world, without them fully realizing it. While the relationship existed, they often believed your presence would always be there. They adjusted to your kindness. They grew comfortable with your patience. They expected your understanding. Human beings naturally adapt to what feels permanent. That is why people often overlook what matters most while it is still available. Then one day, the familiar comfort disappears. The daily messages stop. The emotional safety fades. The predictable warmth is gone. At first, they may convince themselves nothing has really changed, but the mind cannot hide from absence forever. Sooner or later, reality begins speaking louder than denial. Stay with me because this is where everything starts shifting in ways they never expected. At first, they try to stay busy. They tell themselves life is moving forward. Work fills the schedule. Friends provide distractions. New routines create temporary comfort. From the outside, everything may even appear normal. They smile when expected. They complete their responsibilities. They continue living as if nothing important has been lost. But quiet moments are different. The drive home feels longer, the evenings become strangely empty, certain songs suddenly carry unexpected weight, familiar places awaken memories they thought had disappeared. Then something small happens. Maybe they pass a restaurant you both visited. Maybe they hear a phrase you always said. Maybe they notice someone laughing the way you laughed. Without warning, the memories return with remarkable clarity. They do not simply remember your face. They remember how safe they felt beside you. They remember the little moments they barely appreciated while they were happening. That is when regret slowly begins growing roots. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It simply settles into the spaces where certainty used to live. Keep listening, because the next stage is the one almost nobody talks about, yet it changes everything. As time continues, something even deeper begins taking place. They stop missing only your presence. They begin questioning themselves. They replay old conversations in their mind. They wonder why they ignored certain moments. They think about the messages they never answered with enough care. They remember the times you reached for them emotionally while they were distracted, guarded, or emotionally unavailable. At the time, those moments felt ordinary. Looking back, they suddenly become priceless. That is how regret works. It changes the meaning of memories after they are already gone. The heart starts rewriting the story with painful honesty. Excuses lose their power. Defensiveness becomes harder to maintain. Slowly they begin seeing your effort with fresh eyes. They recognize the patience you offered. They understand the quiet sacrifices you made. They finally notice how much emotional weight you carried while trying to keep the relationship alive. That realization can be overwhelming because it arrives after the opportunity to respond has already passed. And when people reach this point, they often discover that the silence they once ignored has become louder than any argument they ever experienced. What happens next may be the turning point neither of you expected. I am talking about the kind of connection that grows quietly beneath the surface. The kind the deeper part of the mind recognizes long before the thinking mind can explain it with words. When that kind of connection is suddenly removed, something very specific begins happening inside them. It does not feel like relief. It does not feel like freedom, even if they kept telling themselves that was exactly what they wanted. Instead, it feels like something important inside their daily life has stopped working. Almost like part of their emotional system suddenly went offline. Everything still functions, but nothing feels quite the same anymore. Small things begin to feel harder. Ordinary days become slightly heavier. There is a quiet discomfort they cannot explain, just enough to notice, just enough to leave them feeling unsettled without understanding why. During that season, you probably looked at them and believed they were completely fine. They went to work. They spent time with people. They stayed busy. They laughed when expected. From the outside, they looked like someone who had already moved forward. Watching that may have convinced you that perhaps you never meant as much as you once believed. Maybe you told yourself you had imagined the depth of the connection. Maybe you wondered if your heart had simply made the story bigger than it really was. Stay with me, because this part matters more than you realize. What looked like confidence on the outside was often something very different underneath. The truth is that during those weeks or months, they were using every possible distraction they could find. They leaned on routines. They filled their calendar. They surrounded themselves with conversations, entertainment, work, endless responsibilities, anything that kept their thoughts occupied long enough to avoid sitting with what they were actually feeling. None of those things solved the emptiness. They only delayed it. They could not honestly say, "I miss her," because saying those words would force them to admit something much deeper. It would mean admitting they had lost someone who truly mattered. It would mean facing every opportunity they allowed to pass without choosing differently. That is a painful truth for anyone to carry. So instead, the mind protects itself with busyness. It covers the silence with noise. It keeps moving because standing still feels dangerous. This is why appearances can be so misleading. Someone can seem perfectly fine while quietly carrying a growing weight that no one around them can see. Keep listening, because the next part explains why so many people misunderstand what they are actually witnessing. Regret follows its own timeline, and the first stage almost always creates the greatest confusion. From the outside, it often looks as though the person has completely moved on. That is the cruel illusion. The individual carrying the deepest private regret is frequently the same person who appears strongest in public. They smile, they make plans, they seem relaxed, they convince everyone around them that life is going exactly as expected. But appearances rarely tell the whole story. After years of hearing people's hidden thoughts, this pattern no longer surprises me. What still surprises me is how many kind-hearted women talk themselves out of what they quietly know in their own heart, simply because someone else performs confidence so convincingly. So let me say this as clearly as I can. A performance is never the full truth. It never has been. Looking okay does not always mean feeling okay. Staying busy does not always mean being at peace. Sometimes the loudest proof of inner conflict is the effort someone makes to appear completely unaffected. Do not miss what comes next, because it may answer questions you have carried for far too long. I want to ask you something, and I hope you will answer it honestly inside your own heart before rushing past it. During the last few weeks, have you thought about them and noticed something different? Not the old sadness, not the heavy longing that once pulled at your heart every day. Something quieter, something calmer, almost like a peaceful certainty that arrived without explanation. A feeling that simply settled inside you instead of overwhelming you. If you have experienced even one moment like that, pay attention to it. That is not necessarily your imagination trying to create hope. Sometimes, when a bond has been deeply meaningful, people become sensitive to emotional shifts they cannot fully explain with logic alone. Your mind notices small changes before you have words for them. That calm feeling may simply reflect that something inside you has changed, or that the emotional dynamic itself no longer feels the way it once did. Either way, it deserves quiet attention instead of immediate doubt. Keep watching, because understanding this difference may completely change the way you interpret your own healing. Now let us talk about the kind of regret they may be carrying, because it is different from ordinary sadness. This is not simply missing someone. It is not just wishing things had turned out differently. It is the heavy weight that appears when a person finally stops hiding from the truth. No more easy excuses, no more comforting stories that protect the ego, no more pretending certain choices had no real consequences. Deep regret usually unfolds in stages, and recognizing those stages helps you understand the emotional journey much more clearly. The first stage often looks like logic, but underneath it is quiet denial. They tell themselves the timing was wrong. They convince themselves they needed space. They believe you expected too much. They explain the distance as maturity instead of fear. For a while, those explanations feel solid. They become like walls protecting them from difficult emotions. But the truth rarely disappears forever. It enters slowly. It arrives during ordinary afternoons when a familiar song suddenly carries unexpected meaning. It appears on peaceful mornings when the silence feels strangely personal. It slips into quiet moments, sitting across from someone new who seems perfectly kind, yet somehow cannot replace what was once shared. That is when the carefully built story begins to crack, little by little, until the heart finally speaks louder than every excuse that came before. Then one day they find themselves sitting across from someone who, by every reasonable standard, is a wonderful person. Kind, interesting, easy to talk to, yet something feels missing. In that quiet moment, a realization arrives with surprising force. This does not feel the same. Nothing since you has carried the same depth. Nothing has created the same sense of comfort or meaning. Suddenly, the story they spent so much time building begins to lose its strength. Small cracks appear. Cold air slips through them. They try to repair the story, but nothing works because the problem was never the walls. The problem was the foundation beneath them. It was never strong enough to support the life they were trying to convince themselves was complete. This is the next stage, when the old explanation slowly falls apart. It happens quietly, almost unnoticed at first, yet it changes everything. If you have already noticed unusual things happening lately, stay with me because this part may explain them. The unexpected message that appears without warning. The like on an old photo they had no reason to search for. A mutual friend mentioning their name during a conversation that had nothing to do with them. A strange coincidence that feels almost impossible to ignore. These moments are rarely as random as they appear. They often reveal someone whose heart is beginning to admit what their pride still struggles to say out loud. As that inner story continues collapsing, the truth starts finding small ways to escape. They may not be ready for a long conversation. They may not even understand everything they are feeling yet. But emotions have a way of revealing themselves through small actions before they become words. A brief message, a question that seems unimportant, a memory shared for no obvious reason. Looking back at something connected to you, reaching out indirectly instead of directly. These little moments often happen because the heart has already moved ahead while the mind is still trying to catch up. Then comes the next stage. This is where everything becomes impossible to ignore. The story is gone. The excuses no longer work. They are standing among the pieces of the life they convinced themselves was enough, seeing it clearly for perhaps the very first time. Now they face a choice. They can build another layer of protection. They can create another explanation that helps them avoid the truth for a little longer. Or they can turn around completely. They can begin walking toward what they now know is real, carrying the full weight of everything they allowed to slip away. There is no guarantee they will be welcomed, no promise that it is not already too late, only honesty remains. Keep listening because this next part may completely change how you see their return. That journey back is not an easy one. It asks more from a person than pride ever could. It requires them to carry one of the heaviest emotional burdens anyone can experience, the clear and unprotected realization that they were wrong. Not wrong in a general sense, not simply imperfect, wrong about something deeply personal, wrong about you, wrong about your value, wrong about the love you offered, wrong about the moments they chose distance instead of closeness, comfort instead of courage, silence instead of honest communication. They now recognize that every time they stepped away, they also stepped further from something that truly mattered. That realization changes people in ways that are difficult to describe. If these words speak to something inside you, stay until the end because the next few moments matter even more. Understanding what happens here may protect your heart from making a decision based only on old pain instead of present reality. Let me speak to you honestly, the way a trusted friend would. Not the kind of honesty that simply repeats what feels comfortable, but the kind that helps you see more clearly. One reason so many women struggle when someone returns is not because they are wrong to be careful. Caution is understandable. The difficulty comes when every new step is measured only against every old mistake. The mind begins comparing today's actions with yesterday's disappointments. Every conversation is weighed against old silence. Every effort is judged by past failures. Every small sign of change is tested against memories that still carry pain. That constant comparison can quietly damage something that was trying to become different. It becomes difficult to notice genuine growth when every moment is filtered through old wounds. This does not mean forgetting the past or pretending nothing happened. It simply means allowing yourself to see what is actually standing in front of you instead of only what once stood there. Stay with me because this distinction changes everything. The person who returns may not be exactly the same person who walked away. Sometimes real change happens quietly, long before anyone else can see it. Holding someone forever responsible for an older version of themselves, even after sincere growth has taken place, can sometimes recreate a story that had already begun changing inside them. The person who once pulled away may have been reacting to fears they did not understand. They may have confused emotional distance with safety. They may have believed needing space was the only way to protect themselves. The behavior hurt you. That pain was real. The disappointment was real. None of that should be dismissed. But beneath those choices was often fear rather than indifference. Fear that learned to look like independence. Fear that disguised itself as needing more time. Fear that convinced them they could not handle the depth of what they truly felt. Many people step back not because they feel too little, but because they quietly become overwhelmed by feelings they have never learned how to carry. That does not excuse the hurt. It simply explains part of the story. The person finding their way back has often gone through an inner change that nobody else could easily see. It may not have come through one dramatic event. There may be no single moment that explains everything. Instead, it happened slowly during quiet evenings, empty mornings, and long hours when distractions finally stopped working. They have spent time sitting with your absence instead of running from it. They have felt what life actually costs without your presence. They have stopped avoiding those emotions long enough to understand what they truly lost. That kind of understanding cannot be borrowed from advice or learned through quick conversations. It grows through experience, through silence, through reflection, through living with the consequences of choices until they finally become impossible to ignore. That deeper clarity is what they carry now. And before we finish, there is one more important thing you need to understand. That honesty is still new. It is still delicate, not because they are weak, but because genuine accountability is always vulnerable in the beginning. They do not know how you will respond. They do not know whether the door is still open or whether too much time has passed. They wonder if who they are today will ever be enough to heal what was damaged yesterday. That uncertainty often makes their return gentle instead of dramatic, careful instead of confident. Do not mistake that careful approach for weakness. People naturally move slowly when they are carrying something precious they are deeply afraid of losing again.